Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a really dramatic high-stakes conflict. It's where citizen activism slammed right into the slow grind of the law and, well, the relentless speed of a construction crew.
Yeah, we're diving into this specific case study. They call it the Oliegrunden Paradox over in Midelfart, Denmark. Just picture this. You have a local citizen group, Biobevar, fighting tooth and nail, really, to save this natural area, an area packed with highly protected species.
Right.
They drag the developers, the authorities to court. They're invoking, the highest levels of EU law and actually getting a massive win, a legally binding victory.
That sounds like the perfect ending, doesn't it? A clear win for nature. But here's the profound irony at the heart of this whole deep dive. The huge legal victory.
Yeah.
The one that overturned the entire building approval. It might actually be completely meaningless in practice. So our mission today is to try and understand why the legal system just couldn't keep pace with the bulldozers.
Yeah.
And, what happens when the law ends up being more like a retroactive punishment instead of a proactive shield.
Exactly. We'll explore that clash. Planning law, economic interests, and the really slow, very vulnerable timescale of nature itself. We'll focus on, I think, three core things. The role of Biobevar, this citizen group, the importance of these highly protected Annex fee species, and this key legal failure, the duty to investigate. A duty the courts eventually said was breached.
Okay, let's set the scene first. The place itself. What was the Oliegrunden, the oil site, before all this kicked off? Our sources call it a 63,000 square meter nature pearl, an incredible oasis of untouched land.
Yeah, it really was a kind of beautiful accident of history, actually, because the land used to be an oil reserve. It had this fence around it, and it was just left untouched for about 40 years. So that fence, meant for security, well, it unintentionally created the sanctuary. You had this really rich ecosystem develop. 40-year-old forest, lakes, swampy areas, all tucked away inside.
And the municipality, what was their vision for this sanctuary?
And housing. Yeah, they approved a local plan for a pretty big residential area, some low-rise buildings, but also, and this is critical, 4 high-rises, planned to go up to 30 meters.
Wow, okay.
So the environment was, directly in conflict with that development plan, that specific mix of, standing water and forest. It turned out to be completely irreplaceable habitat for 2 groups of very sensitive species, bats, flaggermus, and most importantly, the great crested newt, that's Storven salamander.
And these aren't just any animals, right? This is really the core of the problem. They're classified as Annex 4 species. That's under the EU Habitat Directive. Can you tell us what that designation means, practically speaking?
It raises the legal bar a lot. Annex 4 species, they're seen as highly vulnerable, needing special protection. So if they're even potentially present on a site, the authorities have this extremely strict requirement. It's that duty to investigate and document before any development plan can even get the green light.
You have to prove you won't harm them.
Exactly. Prove you won't harm the species or their breeding sites, their resting places, their habitat, basically.
And what's really fascinating here, and maybe a bit concerning, is that the local authorities seem to have failed this fundamental duty right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. The initial official inspections, one in 2008, another in 2020, were later found to be just insufficient. They really only focused on the permanent lakes. They kind of ignored the crucial temporary ponds, the damp forest floor, all the places these newts actually need.
So who found them?
Well, it wasn't the municipality or the developers, that's for sure. It was Biobevar, the citizen group. They literally went out there, found great crested newts outside the original fenced area, and basically had to force the issue into the open. They even got it on the local TV news, TV2 Fionn, just to make people pay attention.
Wow.
It really highlights, the huge responsibility that falls on ordinary citizens when the official bodies don't do their job properly.
So the citizens are raising the alarm, but the official wheels, they just kept turning. In 2021, the city council approves the plan. Pretty decisively, too, 21 votes to 4. And what happened next really shows that the developers, well, they were definitely expecting the law to be slow.
Oh, yeah. They were ready to go, instantly. Despite the obvious protests, despite Biobevar's pending legal challenge, the builders just pushed ahead. They announced they'd take the first spade dig, as they put it, in autumn 2021. And they started cutting down the first trees almost immediately. They knew it was a race.
Okay, this feels like the critical moment for the legal system. You've got a fundamental challenge raised, basically saying this plan violates EU-level habitat protection.
Yeah.
Why couldn't the courts just issue a temporary halt right then, stop the digging the moment the legal challenge began? Isn't that like standard procedure?
Well, it should be, perhaps. But it's complicated, and it often depends on the specific national laws and how they're interpreted. In cases like this one, the legal process itself is just notoriously slow.
Right.
The challenge has to work its way up through various local, then national administrative bodies in this case. It was the Planning Appeals Board before it even gets properly tested in a court. And that process alone takes months, sometimes years.
Years, while the building continues.
Yeah. And as our sources point out, experience just shows that construction is often finished, or at least, substantially completed, way before the case ever reaches the highest legal levels.
So basically, the local authority, maybe the developers too, they kind of bet that the law would simply move slower than their bulldozers. Okay, tell us specifically then, what was Biobevar's argument? What was the legal failing they pointed to?
It all boiled down to that core duty, the duty to investigate. Biobevar argued the studies that were done regarding these Annex 4 species were just insufficient, superficial, really. The authorities, their consultants, they just failed to properly document the entire habitat, not just the obvious lakes. And both the Midelfart municipality and the Planning Appeals Board, that's the national body that reviewed the local decision, were later criticized harshly by the court for basically setting aside this duty. They approved the plan based on bad evidence, insufficient evidence. And that's a fundamental breach of both Danish and EU law. The law is designed specifically to protect nature.
Which brings us to this really shocking and frankly kind of confusing outcome in court. Section 3 here. Despite all the destruction that was already happening on the ground, Biobevar actually won. A massive victory in the Oden City Court.
It was incredibly clear. A really unambiguous win for the conservationists, legally speaking. The city court ruled definitively that both the appeals board and the municipality had failed in their legal duties regarding those Annex 4 species. They said they acted directly in conflict with the EU Habitat Directive and Danish environmental law. No gray area there.
And this wasn't just like a symbolic ruling, was it? The verdict demanded a complete rollback.
Total rollback. The entire local plan, the whole approval process had to be taken up again from scratch. And the court specifically said the review must happen as if the area had not already been cleared or built upon.
As if.
Wow. Exactly. So in principle, right, this ruling established a huge point. You cannot just bulldoze protected species and worry about the legal fallout later. Legally, Biobevar had won everything they possibly could have asked for. The court confirmed. Roll back the process. Future building is blocked until proper, adequate biological assessments and environmental evaluations are done. The law, in that moment, really asserted its power.
But now we hit that bitter paradox. The whole reason we're doing this deep dive, the law demands this fictional reality. Treat the area as if nothing happened. But on the ground, everything has happened.
Precisely. And while the Planning Appeals Board is now appealing that judgment, taking it to the Eastern High Court, construction just carries on. Our sources paint this really grim picture of irreversible damage that's fatal to the local ecology.
Walk us through that ecological destruction again. Why is a delay of, say, a year or two while the courts decide, why is that fatal for these specific species, like the newt?
It comes down to their basic survival needs, especially for amphibians like the great crested newt. We're talking about, physical destruction first, filling in the small water holes. Those are the crucial breeding grounds.
Right.
Their eggs, their larvae, they just die instantly when that standing water vanishes. Then beyond that, the land itself is being cleared of the scrub, the thickets they hide in, and the soil gets heavily compacted by the machinery.
What does compaction do?
Compaction is terrible for them. It prevents humidity from being retained in the soil, and it destroys the microecosystems they need to hibernate underground, to find food. For the bats, too, cutting down old trees just eliminates irreplaceable roosting sites, nesting habitats. That takes years and years to replace, if ever.
And the great crested newt population, you said it depends on this humid, connected environment. So when you break that connection, fill the ponds, compact the soil, what happens to the actual newts there?
The local populations, they're likely already broken up, fragmented, or maybe just gone entirely from that specific site now. Even if the law, let's say 5 years down the line, forces the municipality to restore the area, you just can't magic back the species life foundation, A 40-year-old established forest, an established breeding population of sensitive amphibians that takes decades to replace, maybe longer. It just highlights that fundamental timing mismatch. It really is a race, isn't it? A race between bulldozers moving at economic speed and legislation moving at judicial speed.
And nature almost always loses that race. Which is why, as you said, even a final complete victory, maybe even in the Supreme Court eventually, it would just feel hollow.
Absolutely hollow. The win becomes symbolic or purely legal. It confirms the authorities broke the law, yes. But the ecological price, that's already been paid by the species that were supposed to be protected.
It's a retroactive victory.
Exactly. The environmental laws, they were meant to be a shield, right? A protective barrier before the damage happens, not just a tool for punishment afterwards. This case makes it painfully clear. For species protection laws to actually work, the enforcement has to be immediate, fast.
So where do things stand right now, legally? The Planning Appeals Board is challenging the evidence in the High Court. Biobevar is preparing its defense. But what are they doing or trying to do to stop the ongoing destruction?
Well, their main focus right now, legally, is seeking this really critical tool. It's called a suspensive effect. Basically, it's a legal injunction. If they get it granted by the court, it would halt all construction immediately, right now, until the whole case is finally settled, however long that takes.
Okay, that sounds crucial.
It is, because without that injunction, the appeals board, or rather the developers working under their permission, can just keep building, knowing they can probably finish most of the work before the next judgment even comes down.
And let's say Biobevar does ultimately win. At the highest level, maybe the Supreme Court. What would the practical implications be for the municipality then?
Well, in theory, they would be ordered to restore the site or somehow compensate for the destroyed natural values. But, like we've discussed, restoring a complex, established ecosystem, it's incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, certainly in any short time frame.
So it becomes about money.
Often, yeah. It turns into a matter of compensation. Either financial payout or maybe setting aside some other piece of land nearby as a sort of replacement, which of course isn't the same as protecting the original unique site.
And if Denmark, as a country, somehow fails to enforce its own laws, even after a Supreme Court ruling, that opens up the highest level of escalation, right? The EU.
Exactly. If Denmark is ultimately found to have failed in its duty to protect these Annex 4 species, and the Danish courts don't effectively uphold that protection through enforcement, then the case could go all the way to the EU Commission.
And that could lead to?
That could lead to formal treaty breach proceedings against Denmark as a member state, potentially resulting in huge fines or even legally binding injunctions from the EU level ordering restoration or other actions. The stakes become international at that point.
This whole case feels like a profound test, doesn't it? A test of the very democratic systems that created these environmental protection laws in the first place. It really asks us, and you, listener, a tough philosophical question. What does justice actually mean when the damage is already done, when it can't be undone? Can our human systems, law, economics, planning ever really function effectively within nature's timescale?
Yeah, the Oliegrunden case powerfully demonstrates that the promise of protection that's written into law, well, it only really holds weight if it's enforced swiftly, immediately. When local authorities or developers choose to just rush ahead and basically gamble on facing the legal consequences years later, they effectively break that democratic promise. This whole saga, maybe it's less about winning the legal argument in the end and more about whether you can secure immediate action. Stop the digging now.
So the core lesson, the takeaway from the Oliegrunden saga, seems pretty clear. Legal protection needs both details, sure, but it absolutely needs speed. Without enforcement that can actually match the pace of economic development, the law risks becoming just, well, a record of failure, rather than the proactive shield it's meant to be.
We established legally that protected species cannot just be overlooked or bulldozed. That's the firm legal victory from the city court. But the bigger question remains, doesn't it? What has to fundamentally change in our planning processes, in our legal system, to make sure that the speed of the law actually matches the vulnerability of the natural world?
And that's really the question we want to leave you with today. When you're facing down those bulldozers, is the most important thing really to win the case, maybe years down the road? Or is it actually more crucial to have shouted up in time, as they say, and secured that immediate halt order? We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the Oliegrunden paradox, the paradox of winning the legal battle while nature seems to be losing the race.